Marcus Chen felt his stomach drop as the navigation console exploded in a shower of sparks. The cargo freighter times Wanderer times bucked and rolled like a wild animal as it plunged through the alien atmosphere. Warning lights bathed the cockpit in angry red as the ship's computer announced system failures in its calm, infuriating voice. Hull breach in sections 4 through 7. Life support failing. Recommend immediate evacuation. Marcus laughed bitterly. Evacuate to where? He was alone in a dying ship above an unknown world, millions of light years from the nearest human settlement. The automated distress beacon had been destroyed 3 days ago when pirates attacked his convoy. Everyone else was dead or captured. The planet below looked deceptively peaceful through the cracked viewport. Swirls of white clouds drifted over green continents and blue oceans. It could have been Earth's twin sister, if Earth had 2 small moons dancing around each other in the purple sky. Marcus fought the controls as the ship entered its final descent. The engines were gone, leaving only emergency thrusters that sputtered and died. He managed to angle the nose up just enough to avoid a complete nosedive into the surface. The crash came like thunder. When Marcus opened his eyes, everything hurt. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, and his left shoulder felt like someone had tried to remove it with a crowbar. But he was alive. The emergency lights cast eerie shadows through the twisted wreckage of what had once been his home for the past 5 years. He spent the next hour freeing himself from the wreckage and salvaging what he could. His survival kit included basic medical supplies, a portable water purifier, emergency rations for 2 weeks, and a plasma cutter that might serve as both tool and weapon. His translator unit had survived the crash, which was fortunate since he had no idea what kind of life existed on this world. The ship had carved a deep scar through what looked like a forest of crystal trees. The trunks were translucent and sang in the wind with beautiful, haunting notes. Strange fruits hung from branches that seemed to bend toward him as he passed, as if curious about this new visitor. Marcus had walked for perhaps an hour when he heard the singing. It wasn't the crystal trees this time, but actual voices, high and sweet, like children's voices, but with an odd quality that made his translator struggle to find meaning. He followed the sound through a grove of silver grass that reached his waist. The village appeared suddenly, as if it had been hidden by some optical illusion. Small houses made of the same crystal material as the trees dotted a clearing beside a stream that sparkled with an inner light. Gardens filled with geometric flowers created perfect patterns between the dwellings. And everywhere, the inhabitants. They were humanoid but clearly not human. Each stood about 5 feet tall with slender builds and faces that seemed almost too perfect to be real. Their skin had a porcelain quality, smooth and flawless, ranging in color from pale white to deep amber. Their eyes were larger than human eyes, in shades of violet, silver, and gold. Long hair in impossible colors, blue, green, silver, flowed down their backs. They moved with an artificial grace, as if every gesture had been carefully choreographed. When they saw Marcus, they stopped what they were doing and stared with expressions of wonder and terror. One of them stepped forward. She was taller than the others, with silver hair that seemed to contain actual starlight and eyes the color of deep space. When she spoke, Marcus's translator rendered her words into heavily accented English. "You are human?" she asked, her voice carrying notes of hope and disbelief. "Yes," Marcus said carefully. "My ship crashed. I mean no harm." The woman's perfect features crumpled with what could only be relief. She turned to the others and spoke rapidly in their musical language. Marcus caught fragments through his translator. Prophecy. Savior. Finally. "I am Lirelei, speaker for the Cathara," she said, turning back to him. "We have waited so long for your kind to find us. Our ancestors spoke of humans in their songs, but we began to believe you were only legends." Marcus felt confused. "Your ancestors knew humans? That's impossible. We've never been to this sector of space." Lirelei's expression grew troubled. Perhaps we should speak with the memory keeper. But first, you are injured. Please, let us tend to your wounds." They led him to the largest building in the village, which seemed to be some kind of community center. The inside was filled with soft light that came from the walls themselves. Marcus was guided to a chair that molded itself perfectly to his body. A group of the Kithara brought medical supplies that looked nothing like human technology but seemed to work by the same principles. They cleaned his wounds with solutions that stung briefly before numbing the pain completely. When they wrapped his injured shoulder, the bandages felt warm and seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. "You heal differently than we do," observed one of the healers. "Your body fights the treatment, then accepts it." Curious. While they worked, more Kithara gathered around. Marcus noticed they seemed to have different specializations based on their appearance. Some had hands that looked designed for delicate work, with longer, more slender fingers. Others had broader builds, and what looked like tool marks on their arms and hands. A few had cranial ridges that suggested enhanced processing capabilities. "Why did you say you've been waiting for humans?" Marcus asked Lirelei. She exchanged glances with the others before answering. "The songs speak of a time when the Kithara lived among the stars, traveling between worlds in great ships. But something happened. A great catastrophe that forced our ancestors to seek shelter on this world. They brought with them stories of another species, one that could adapt to any challenge, solve any problem, survive in any environment. They called them the Eternal Travelers, and said that one day, when the Kithara faced their greatest need, humans would come to help them." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien medical treatments. "What kind of catastrophe?" "The songs are unclear," Lirelei admitted. "Much knowledge was lost, but the memory keeper may know more. She is our eldest, the last of those who still carry the complete song cycles of our people." They finished treating his wounds as the alien day began to fade. Marcus noticed that the crystal structures throughout the village began to glow more brightly as darkness fell, creating a soft, beautiful illumination that needed no power source he could identify. "You must rest now," Lirelei said. "Tomorrow, we will take you to the memory keeper. And perhaps you can help us understand why the songs are beginning to fade." She led him to a small dwelling that had been prepared for his use. The bed was more comfortable than anything he'd slept in for years, and the room had a peaceful quality that made his eyelids heavy despite his churning thoughts. But as Marcus drifted toward sleep, he heard something that made his eyes snap open. In the distance, very faintly, came the sound of machinery. Not the organic, musical sounds of the Kithara village, but the harsh, mechanical noise of engines and industrial equipment. And it was getting closer. The next morning brought answers that raised even more questions. The memory keeper was ancient even by Kithara standards, her once perfect features marked by fine lines that seemed to map out centuries of accumulated wisdom. Her eyes had faded to a pale silver. But when she looked at Marcus, he felt as if she was seeing straight through to his soul. She lived in the center of the village in a structure that was part building and part living tree. The walls pulsed gently with bioluminescent patterns that Marcus's translator identified as some form of written language, constantly shifting and updating. "So," she said in a voice like wind chimes, "the human has come at last. I confess, I had begun to doubt the old songs myself." "I had," she said, I had begun to doubt the old songs myself." Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. Around them, the walls displayed what looked like star maps and technical diagrams that made no sense to his eyes. "Lirelei says your people have stories about humans. But we've never been to this part of space before. My ship was the first human vessel in this system." The memory keeper's laugh was like silver bells. "Oh, child, your people have been here before. Not to this world, perhaps, but to this region of space, long ago, when the great darkness fell across the galaxy." She gestured to the walls, and the patterns shifted to show what Marcus recognized as a representation of their local galactic arm. Red symbols appeared in various locations, pulsing like infected wounds. "The Devourers," she said simply. "They came from the void between galaxies. Machines that consumed all organic life to fuel their endless reproduction. World after world fell silent. The great civilizations, the Kithara among them, fled before their advance. Marcus felt his blood chill. He'd heard whispers of such things in the deep space stations. Legends of ancient machine wars that had supposedly happened millions of years ago, but the memory keeper spoke as if it had been recent. "How long ago was this?" he asked. "By your reckoning?" "Perhaps 50,000 years. We fled our homeworld when the Devourers consumed the outer systems. Our ships brought us here, to this world at the very edge of known space. We thought we would be safe." The wall patterns shifted again, showing the blue-green world they now inhabited, but Marcus could see defensive installations around it, weapon platforms and shield generators that were clearly far beyond anything the current Cathara possessed. "Your ancestors built those defenses? With human help," the memory keeper said. "The last human ship to reach our fleet before we went into hiding. Their captain was called Rodriguez, I believe. Captain Elena Rodriguez of the vessel Time's Indomitable Asterisk. She and her crew helped us establish this sanctuary and taught us how to maintain the barriers that keep us hidden." Marcus felt the universe tilt around him. Hidden from what? The memory keeper's expression grew grave. "The Devourers never stopped searching for us. Our ancestors' songs speak of great battles in space, of human ships leading desperate defenses against the machine swarms. Most of the human colonies fell, but some escaped to unknown regions of space. We always hoped. We always believed that somewhere, your people survived and thrived. We did," Marcus said quietly. "We built new civilizations far from the old sectors. But we lost most of our history in the evacuation. The machine wars became legend, then myth, and yet here you are, when we need you most," the memory keeper said. "The defenses are failing, Marcus Chen. After 50 millennia, the barriers that keep us hidden are beginning to break down. And the Devourers, they are still out there, still searching." As if summoned by her words, a low alarm began to sound throughout the village. The crystal structures flashed in synchronized patterns of red and gold. Marcus looked up to see Lirelei rushing toward them, her perfect face tight with fear. "Memory keeper," she said breathlessly. "The outer sensors have detected something. Ships, approaching from the deep void. The configuration. It matches the descriptions in the war songs." The memory keeper closed her ancient eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, they seemed to hold all the weight of 50,000 years. "They have found us," she said simply. "The Devourers have finally found us." Marcus stood up, his mind already racing through possibilities. The mechanical sounds he'd heard the night before suddenly made sense. Somewhere on this world, ancient defense systems were powering up for the first time in millennia. Systems that had been designed by humans and maintained by a people who were gradually forgetting how to use them. "How long do we have?" he asked. Lirelei checked a device that looked like a crystal flower. "Based on their current speed, perhaps 6 days before they reach the outer detection grid. 2 more days after that before they can begin a detailed scan of the system. 8 days. 8 days to understand technology he'd never seen. Help a people who had been living peacefully for centuries prepare for war, and somehow stand against an enemy that had once conquered half the galaxy." Marcus Chen looked around at the beautiful village, at the gentle people who had welcomed him, at the memory keeper, who held the last fragments of a civilization's knowledge. Somewhere out there in the void, ancient nightmares were awakening. The Devourers had found their hiding place at last. But they hadn't counted on one thing. They hadn't counted on a human being here when they arrived. And Marcus was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, that was going to make all the difference. The next few hours transformed the peaceful village into something that looked more like a military command center. The Cathara moved with urgent purpose. But Marcus could see the fear in their perfect faces. They were trying to remember things their ancestors had known, struggling to activate systems that had been dormant for 50,000 years. Marcus spent the morning with Lirelei and 3 other Cathara examining the central defense console. A crystalline structure the size of a small building that had been grown directly into the living rock beneath the village. When they activated it, holographic displays filled the air with information that made Marcus's head spin. "This shows the orbital defense grid," Lirelei explained, pointing to a 3-dimensional map of the planet. Dozens of satellites appeared as small blue dots in various orbital patterns. but many of them show red status indicators. Marcus studied the display. His engineering training helped him understand what he was seeing, even though the technology was unlike anything in human space. Those red indicators mean system failures. How many platforms are still operational? A Kithara named Theron, who seemed to be their closest equivalent to a military specialist, manipulated the controls with hands that moved almost too fast to follow. 63% of the orbital weapons are functional, 71% of the shield generators. But the main planetary defense cannon, he gestured helplessly. The power core has been offline for 3,000 years. We tried to restart it many times. But the ignition sequence requires knowledge we no longer possess. Marcus felt a spark of hope. Show me the power core specifications. What he saw made him whistle low. The planetary defense cannon was built into a mountain on the far side of the continent. A weapon capable of punching through the armor of capital ships at interplanetary distances. Its power source was a controlled fusion reactor the size of a city block, designed using principles that combined human engineering with Kithara biotechnology. The problem is here, Marcus said, pointing to a section of the display. The fusion reaction requires a precise ignition sequence, and your ancestors built in multiple safety locks to prevent accidental activation. But over time, the biotechnological components have evolved. They've literally grown beyond their original specifications. Lirelei looked confused. I do not understand. How can technology evolve? Your people don't just build machines, Marcus explained. You grow them. Your technology is part organic, part mechanical. It learns and adapts over time. But that means it can also forget, or change in ways that weren't intended. This was the kind of problem humans were good at solving. Human technology was crude compared to the elegant biomechanical systems of the Kithara. But it had one advantage. It stayed exactly the same unless someone deliberately changed it. Humans had learned to work with systems they didn't fully understand, to improvise solutions using whatever tools were available. I need to see the cannon itself, Marcus said, and I need to understand how your biotechnology thinks. The journey to the defense cannon took them across terrain that showcased the strange beauty of the Kithara homeworld. They traveled in vehicles that looked more like living creatures than machines, with sleek organic curves and surfaces that felt warm to the touch. The vehicles moved by manipulating local gravity fields, skimming silently above the crystal forests and silver grasslands. Marcus rode with Lirelei and Theron, while a team of technical specialists followed in 2 more vehicles. During the 3-hour journey, he learned more about Kithara society and their relationship with technology. Everything we build is alive, in a sense, Lirelei explained. Our tools learn from us, adapt to our needs, grow stronger through use. But they also develop their own preferences, you might say. The defense cannon has been dormant for so long that it may have forgotten its purpose. The cannon site was magnificent and terrifying. The entire mountain had been carefully sculpted into the shape of a massive weapon, its barrel pointing toward the stars. But Marcus could see immediately that something was wrong. What should have been clean technological lines were overgrown with organic structures that pulsed with their own internal light. It's like a forest grew inside a starship, he murmured. The biotechnological components had indeed evolved far beyond their original design. The fusion reactor chamber was filled with structures that looked like enormous tree roots, glowing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt to look at directly. The control systems had become so complex that even the Kithara specialists couldn't understand them anymore. Your ancestors were brilliant, Marcus said as they stood in the main control chamber. They created a weapon that could literally think for itself, adapt to new threats, improve its own performance. But they didn't account for what would happen during 50,000 years of peace. He spent hours studying the overgrown systems, taking notes, and making sketches. The Kithara watched him with expressions of hope and bewilderment. They were used to technology that responded intuitively to their thoughts and emotions. Marcus's systematic, analytical approach was completely alien to them. The problem is that the cannon has grown beyond its programming, he finally announced. It's no longer just a weapon. It's become something like an artificial mind, and that mind has been dreaming for 50,000 years. To wake it up, we need to communicate with it directly. Communicate? Theron looked skeptical. It is a machine, not a person. Is it? Marcus asked. Look at these patterns. He pointed to the bioluminescent displays that covered the walls. They're not random. They're structured. Complex. The cannon is trying to tell us something. Working with the Kythera specialists, Marcus began to decode the light patterns. It took them 2 full days, working almost without rest. But gradually, they began to understand. The cannon's biotechnological mind had indeed been dreaming, creating elaborate fantasies about its purpose and place in the universe. It had forgotten that it was a weapon and had become convinced that it was some kind of guardian spirit, protecting not just the planet but the entire concept of peace itself. That's why the ignition sequence fails, Marcus realized. The cannon refuses to activate because it believes that firing would violate its nature as a protector of peace. How can we convince it otherwise? Lirelei asked. Marcus smiled grimly. We tell it the truth. We show it what's coming. The communication interface was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Instead of keyboards or control surfaces, it was a chamber filled with crystalline formations that responded to direct neural contact. The Kythera specialists had been hesitant to make such contact, afraid of damaging the cannon's delicate artificial mind. But Marcus had no such reservations. Humans had always been good at talking to machines, at finding ways to make technology work even when they didn't fully understand it. He placed his hands on the neural interface and opened his mind to the cannon's artificial consciousness. The experience was overwhelming. Marcus found himself floating in a space that was part digital simulation, part organic dream. The cannon's mind was vast and ancient, filled with memories of construction, of the Great War, of the long peace that followed. It had indeed forgotten its nature as a weapon, seeing itself instead as a gentle guardian watching over the world below. But Marcus brought with him knowledge of what was coming. Through the neural link, he shared his memories of the detection screens, the approaching ships, the ancient enemy that had never stopped searching for survivors. He showed the cannon images of other worlds that had fallen to the devourers, turning from living planets into lifeless machinery. The artificial mind recoiled in horror, then anger. Marcus felt its thought processes shifting, ancient battle protocols awakening from their long sleep. The cannon began to remember what it had been built for, why its creators had given it such terrible power. I understand. The voice that spoke in Marcus's mind was vast and musical, like a choir of crystal bells. The peace was always temporary. The guardianship was always preparation for this moment. Will you help us? Marcus asked. I will serve, the cannon replied. I will remember my duty. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Throughout the mountain, dormant systems blazed to life. The organic overgrowth began to restructure itself, revealing the precision machinery beneath. The fusion reactor hummed with building power as control systems that had been dormant for millennia activated and began running diagnostic sequences. But Marcus knew that one planetary defense cannon, no matter how powerful, wouldn't be enough to stop a devourer fleet. They needed every advantage they could get. The trip back to the village revealed the scope of the approaching crisis. The orbital sensors had detected the full size of the enemy force, 47 vessels of various types, ranging from small scouts to massive construction ships designed to strip mine entire planets. It was a full harvesting fleet, not just a scouting force. They must be very confident they've found us, Theron observed grimly. They're not sending warships first to test our defenses. They're sending everything they need to consume the entire world. Marcus spent the next day working with Kythera engineers to understand their other defense systems. The orbital weapon platforms were elegant, but had limited ammunition supplies. The shield generators could protect specific areas of the planet but wouldn't stop a determined assault. The Kythera had clearly been designed as a defensive civilization, content to hide rather than fight. But humans had always been different. What about your spacecraft? Marcus asked during a planning session in the village center. The ships your ancestors used to reach this world? The memory keeper gestured toward the mountains beyond the crystal forests. They were preserved, but only as monuments. They have not flown for 30,000 years. Show me. The spacecraft were magnificent, even after millennia of storage. 12 vessels rested in underground hangars carved from living rock, their biomechanical hulls still intact and gleaming. They were nothing like human ships, being grown rather than built, but Marcus could see the underlying principles of their design. "They're still alive," he said with wonder. "Dormant, but alive. The ships dreamed alongside their crews for 10,000 years," the memory keeper explained. "But when the last of the original colonists died, the ships entered deep hibernation. We have kept them maintained as sacred sites, but we no longer know how to wake them." Marcus walked among the sleeping vessels, his engineer's eye cataloging their capabilities. Each ship was roughly equivalent to a human frigate in size, but their biotechnological nature made them far more adaptable. They could literally reshape themselves for different mission profiles, growing new weapon systems or defensive structures as needed. "The same neural interface technology that worked on the cannon should work here," he said. "But we'll need pilots who can bond with the ship's artificial minds. Our people no longer think in the old ways," Lirelai said sadly. "We have become peaceful, contemplative. The warrior mindset of our ancestors is lost to us." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we'll have to teach your ships to think like humans." The process of awakening the fleet was both fascinating and terrifying. Each ship had its own personality, developed over thousands of years of dreaming. Some were eager and aggressive, ready to fight the ancient enemy. Others were melancholy, mourning for crews who had died long ago. A few were actually insane, their artificial minds damaged by millennia of isolation. Marcus worked with each vessel individually, using the neural interface to share human memories of warfare, strategy, and determination. He showed them how humans had always fought against impossible odds, how they improvised and adapted, and refused to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. The ships drank in this knowledge eagerly. They had been built by a warrior civilization that had forgotten how to fight, and they yearned to remember their purpose. Under Marcus's guidance, they began to modify themselves, growing new weapon systems based on half-remembered schematics and human tactical innovations. 3 days before the Devourer fleet arrived at the outer detection grid, the first Cathara ship lifted off from its underground hangar. It was beautiful and terrible, its hull gleaming with bioluminescent patterns that shifted like living tattoos. At its core was an artificial mind that thought with human ruthlessness tempered by Cathara wisdom. By the time the enemy fleet entered the system, 12 ships waited in orbital formation around the planet. Below them, the planetary defense cannon tracked targets with the patience of a predator. On the surface, villages across the world prepared for a siege that might determine the survival of an entire species. Marcus stood in the central command center, watching the approaching enemy through displays that showed the void of space as clearly as if he were standing in it. The Devourer ships were ugly, functional things that looked more like industrial equipment than spacecraft. They moved in precise formations that spoke of machine intelligence untroubled by doubt or fear. "They're not trying to hide anymore," Theron observed. "They know we can see them coming." "They don't care," Marcus replied. "They've done this before. Many times. They know exactly how this is supposed to go." Lirelai looked at him with her large, solemn eyes. "And how is that?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the crash, he felt truly confident. "They expect us to run, or hide, or surrender. They expect us to act like prey." He gestured toward the orbital display where the Cathara fleet held its formation. Beautiful ships that had learned to think like human warriors. "They don't expect us to fight back. They especially don't expect us to fight back intelligently." The Devourer fleet would reach the outer system in 2 days. Marcus had used human ingenuity and determination to wake an ancient civilization from its peaceful slumber. But the real test was about to begin. Everything would depend on whether the combination of human tactical thinking and Cathara biotechnology could overcome an enemy that had once conquered half the galaxy. The war for the future was about to begin. The Devourer fleet arrived exactly when the long-range sensors predicted they would. Marcus watched from the command center as 47 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, their dark hulls absorbing the light from the local star. For several minutes, they simply hung in space, scanning and analyzing everything they could detect. "They're confused," Theron observed, studying the enemy formation patterns. Their sensors are detecting the orbital defenses, but the readings don't match what they expect from a Kithara settlement. Marcus nodded. That was part of the plan. The biotechnological nature of Kithara systems made them naturally difficult for mechanical minds to understand. But the modifications he'd helped implement made them even more confusing. The orbital weapon platforms had been equipped with human-designed signal scramblers, making them appear to be something other than military installations. They're conducting a detailed scan now, Lirelai reported from the sensor station, focusing on the population centers and industrial sites. Let them look, Marcus said. The longer they spend trying to figure out what they're seeing, the better. The Devourers had evolved their tactics over millions of years of conquest. They were used to encountering civilizations that either fled immediately or attempted to negotiate for survival. They had detailed protocols for both scenarios, refined through countless encounters with organic species across the galaxy. But they had never encountered a civilization that actively prepared to resist them using tactics they didn't recognize. The first hint that something was wrong came when the Devourer advance scouts began their approach to the planet. 3 small vessels broke from the main formation and accelerated toward the outer orbital shell, where they would normally establish forward sensor posts before the main fleet arrived. They made it less than halfway before the first Kithara ship revealed itself. The Times singing Blade Times had been hiding in the shadow of one of the planet's moons, its bioluminescent hull patterns dimmed to near invisibility. It moved like a living creature rather than a machine, flowing through space with organic grace that made it almost impossible to target effectively. The Devourer scout never knew what hit it. The Times singing Blade Times struck with weapons that had been redesigned using human tactics, concentrated energy beams that punched through the enemy's armor like a hot knife through ice. The scout ship exploded in a brief, brilliant flash. The second scout tried to retreat, but the Times Harmony of Stars Times was already moving to intercept. The Kithara ships had learned from Marcus's memories of human naval tactics, using coordinated attacks and overlapping fields of fire. The remaining scouts were destroyed within minutes. In the main enemy fleet, alarms began to sound. The Devourers had expected easy prey, not organized resistance. Their formation began to shift, scouts moving forward while the larger vessels prepared for combat. Phase 1 complete, Marcus announced to the command center. They know we can fight. Now they'll try to overwhelm us with superior numbers. The Devourer response was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. They sent half their fleet forward in a classic hammer blow attack, planning to smash through the orbital defenses with brute force while keeping their construction ships safely in reserve. It was the same strategy they had used successfully against hundreds of worlds, but Marcus had studied the historical records in the Memory Keeper's archives. He knew how the Devourers thought, how they adapted to resistance. Most importantly, he knew how to make them overconfident. The Kithara fleet met the enemy advance in open space, 12 elegant ships against 24 industrial killers. For the first few minutes of the engagement, it looked like the classic David and Goliath scenario that had played out so many times before across the galaxy. Then the Kithara ships began to change. This was the advantage of biotechnology that even Marcus hadn't fully anticipated. The ships didn't just carry weapons, they could become weapons, reshaping themselves in real time to meet tactical requirements. The Times Thunderblossom Times suddenly sprouted dozens of additional weapon ports along its hull, turning into a flying gun platform that could engage multiple targets simultaneously. The Times Dream of Tomorrow Times extended pseudopods that acted like additional ships, creating the illusion of a much larger fleet. But the real surprise came when the planetary defense cannon finally spoke. The mountain-sized weapon had been charging for days, its biomechanical systems building toward a discharge that would have been impossible with purely technological systems. When it fired, the energy beam was visible from orbit, a lance of brilliant light that crossed the distance between planet and space in less than a heartbeat. The lead Devourer ship simply ceased to exist. One moment it was a massive construction vessel capable of processing an entire moon into raw materials. The next moment, there was only expanding plasma and twisted metal fragments. The enemy fleet recoiled in shock. Their sensors had detected the cannon's energy signature, but the readings were so far outside normal parameters that their tactical computers had classified it as a sensor malfunction. Now they realized their mistake. Their regrouping, Lirelai reported. Pulling back to maximum engagement range, Marcus smiled grimly. Perfect. Now comes the really clever part. The Devourers were learning, adapting their tactics to account for the unexpected resistance. They began a systematic bombardment of the planet's surface, trying to locate and destroy the defense cannon with concentrated fire from long range. Their targeting was precise and efficient, each salvo designed to probe the planet's defenses and identify weak points. But they were firing at targets that no longer existed. The biotechnological nature of Kithara systems allowed for something that purely mechanical technology couldn't achieve. They could literally move. The defense cannon wasn't just built into the mountain, it was the mountain. A massive organism that could reshape itself as needed. While the Devourers bombarded the original position, the weapon was flowing through underground passages to new firing positions, ready to strike again from unexpected angles. The orbital defense platforms were equally mobile, disguising themselves as asteroids and space debris while repositioning for optimal firing solutions. The Kithara fleet used hit-and-run tactics that Marcus had adapted from human privateering techniques, striking hard and fast before melting back into the void. For 3 days, the battle raged across the entire system. The Devourers found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to any tactical doctrine in their databases. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting with what appeared to be impossible resilience. Weapon systems that had been located and targeted simply moved to new positions and continued firing. But Marcus knew that mobility and deception would only take them so far. The Devourers had overwhelming numerical superiority, and they were beginning to adapt to the unconventional tactics. Soon they would change their approach, using area effect weapons to deny large volumes of space to the defenders. It was time for the final phase of the plan. All ships, begin the convergence pattern, Marcus ordered. Target the command vessel. The Kithara fleet had been carefully studying the enemy formation for days, analyzing communication patterns and command structures. The Devourers operated with a strict hierarchy, their entire fleet controlled by a single massive command ship that coordinated all tactical decisions. It was also their greatest vulnerability. The 12 Kithara ships moved in perfect synchronization, their biomechanical minds linked by quantum entanglement systems that allowed instantaneous communication across vast distances. They appeared to be retreating, drawing the enemy fleet into pursuit formation. The Devourers took the bait. Their command ship moved forward to direct the final assault, confident that the defenders were finally breaking under sustained pressure. It was surrounded by escorts and protected by overlapping shield systems. But it needed to be close to the battle to coordinate the complex multi-vector attack. That's when the planetary defense cannon fired its second shot. But this time, the target wasn't any of the ships. Instead, the energy beam struck a carefully positioned asteroid that had been seeded with Kithara biotechnology weeks before. The asteroid exploded in a chain reaction that created a temporary portal in space-time, a phenomenon that Kithara science had theorized but never attempted. The portal lasted for exactly 14 seconds. That was long enough for all 12 ships of the Kithara fleet to transition through it, emerging directly behind the enemy command vessel before its escorts could react. The battle ended in less than 30 seconds. The Kithara ships struck with every weapon they possessed, targeting the command ship's communication arrays and control centers. Without central coordination, the Devourer fleet immediately lost tactical cohesion. Individual ships began following conflicting programmed responses, some trying to retreat, while others attempted to continue the attack. The Times Song of Victory Times delivered the killing blow, its biomechanical hull flowing over the command ship's bridge like liquid metal before erupting in a cascade of directed energy discharges. The command vessel broke apart in a series of internal explosions, its death throes visible across the entire system. With their command structure destroyed, the remaining Devourer ships fell back on basic survival programming. Some attempted to flee the system. Others tried to establish new command protocols among themselves. A few simply shut down completely, their machine minds unable to function without external direction. The Kithara fleet hunted them methodically, using tactics that combined human ruthlessness with their own technological superiority. Within 6 hours, the last enemy vessel had been destroyed or disabled. The galaxy's most feared predators had been defeated by a civilization they had dismissed as harmless prey. In the aftermath of the battle, Marcus stood in the crystal gardens of the village and watched the auroras dancing across the night sky. The planet's magnetic field was still recovering from the massive energy discharges, creating light shows of impossible beauty. Lirelei found him there as the first moon was setting. Her perfect features were thoughtful as she joined him among the singing trees. "The orbital sensors show no sign of other devourer forces in nearby systems," she said. "It appears we have eliminated the entire hunting pack." Marcus nodded. "They operate in isolated groups to avoid drawing attention to themselves. This fleet was probably working alone, following old sensor traces to find your world. Then we are safe? For now. But word of this will spread. The devourers share information across vast distances. Eventually, they'll realize what happened here and send a larger force to investigate." Lirelei was quiet for a moment, watching the patterns of light in the sky. "Will you stay?" she asked finally, "to help us prepare for what comes next?" It was the question Marcus had been dreading. His ship was destroyed, his cargo lost, his life as a freelance trader effectively over. He could stay here, help the Cathara rebuild their civilization into something capable of defending itself against future threats. It would be meaningful work, important work, but it wouldn't be his work. "I can't," he said quietly. "This is your world, your people, your future. You need to find your own path forward, not follow one that someone else chooses for you. But we still have so much to learn. About warfare, about technology, about thinking the way humans think." Marcus smiled. "You've already learned the most important lesson. You've learned that you can fight back, that you don't have to accept defeat just because an enemy is stronger or more numerous. Everything else is just details." The memory keeper appeared out of the crystal shadows, moving with the silent grace of her great age. "The young human speaks wisdom," she said. "A teacher who stays too long becomes a crutch rather than a guide." "But how will he leave?" Lirelei asked. "His ship is destroyed." "The fleet remembers many things now," the memory keeper replied, "including how to modify themselves for long-distance travel. The Times Harmony of Stars Times has volunteered to carry him back to human space, wherever that might be." Marcus felt a tightness in his throat. "The ship would do that? It wishes to see the civilization that taught it how to be strong," the memory keeper said. "And perhaps it is time for us to make contact with our ancient allies once again. The galaxy has been dark for too long." 3 days later, Marcus stood on the bridge of the Times Harmony of Stars Times as it prepared to leave orbit. The ship had reshaped itself for the journey, growing extended fuel tanks and long-range sensors that would allow it to cross the vast distances between spiral arms. Below them, the planet sparkled with new light. Construction had already begun on orbital shipyards where a new fleet would be built, vessels designed from the beginning to carry the war to the enemy. The Cathara had tasted victory, and they wanted more. "Ready for departure," the ship's artificial mind announced in its musical voice. "Course laid in for the Centauri sector. Human space." Marcus took one last look at the world that had changed his life. "Take us home," he said. As the Times Harmony of Stars Times accelerated toward the edge of the system, Marcus thought about the report he would file with the Trade Authority when he reached human space. A new alliance with a powerful alien civilization, advanced biotechnology that could revolutionize human science, and most importantly, confirmation that humanity's ancient enemies were still out there, still dangerous, but no longer unbeatable. The Devourers had spent 50,000 years believing they were the apex predators of the galaxy. Today, they had learned otherwise. And across human space, preparations would begin for the day when the war finally came home. Behind them, the Caithara homeworld grew smaller in the viewport until it was just another star among billions. But Marcus knew that somewhere in that light, a civilization was awakening from its long peace and remembering how to fight. The galaxy was about to become a much more dangerous place, for the Devourers